workers. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to Applied Theory, and this is our second in the series of the theoretical,
business dual strategy.
Yeah, dual power business strategy. In this particular, oh, by the way, if you don't know, I am Wade, host of the show, also Central Committee, and I am one of the guys that is intimately involved in the business strategies of the party.
So, guys, I think you all know my name, but if you're not familiar, my name is Joey Shantz, and I'm the producer as well as a member of the American Communist Party here in the New Jersey chapter.
And
I'm Grant. I'm Wade's co-host, and in addition to serving on the Central Committee representing the Wisconsin chapter of the ACP, I also serve on the media team, and I'm the show's resident, I guess you could say, geopolitical expert.
Right on. And historian. He's pretty solid on all of his history too. So
I was a history major in college.
There you go. So this is going to be one of those dry topics, but it's not as boring as you think because, and I put out a post earlier today. I was like, everybody wants to look like Stalin. Nobody wants to be Stalin. And this is one of those things where you really have to grasp that Stalin was the 5-year planner. And 5-year planning requires the kind of things that most people consider either boring or maybe even intimidating. You know, it's a lot of this is the industrial side of things, because what's essential to a communist party and a communist movement and revolutionary theory in general is to have a material base, right? And that material base has to be a productive one. So in this particular episode, we're going to be discussing the way to identify where you can start a business from a Marxist-Leninist analysis of imperialism, right? We're going to discuss the type of businesses that we are, going to be creating, because the type of businesses that in the material foundation that you create for the party that you're building and the revolutionary or dual power that you're building, it literally affects the character of the party itself. So the material always affects how you end up executing your strategies. If you have the wrong basis for your business, then it will literally steer you in the direction of how it's formed. And if it's a faulty formation, then you'll end up practicing undermining. You'll end up basically doing undermining practices within your movement. So this is the kind of thing that you want to select, and you want to be careful about how you select, so that the party has a forward motion and doesn't end up, stagnating or even, deteriorating. The third was we're going to be talking about how you even start some of these things. Obviously, it's difficult to start a business. I mean, not everybody has the money, but we are in a party. And for those of you who are attempting to do revolutionary strategy, collective is absolutely necessary. You can't do this stuff on your own, unless you are independently wealthy. And if you are, then you probably aren't watching this show. So the fourth one is, once you get something started, did you plan for scalability? It has to be able to grow into something bigger. It has to have a trajectory, because if it's a kind of business model that stagnates, that cannot expand or provide enough capital, then you have to look for the next business. If at least it produces enough money to gain enough capital to start another business that can scale, you have to go after the scalable businesses, because ultimately forward trajectory requires forward growth, and forward growth, of course, means forward industrial capacity and productive capacity. And the fifth topic we'll be discussing is creating. Once you got something that grows like that, once it can take off and you can create more businesses out of it and more, and all of them are scalable, then eventually you run into this scenario where you can't get the resources in the nation that you're in, which means that you have to start importing. And the problem with that is this entire dual power structure is dependent upon creating businesses that can sort of get out of the capitalist circuit, right? So we're looking at trying to create profits that benefit the community and benefit the actual party and benefit, but not actually benefit capitalists. You want to remove any kind of way for them to control your profits. You want to remove any kind of way for them to control your demand and supply. And so this requires creating with an infrastructure mentality, right? To create your own closed system so that you can have your own independent grid in your, small townships that you're building in, so that you don't have to rely on them to keep the lights on, because they will cut the power. The kind of things that capitalists will do to prevent the growth of any kind of, democratic sovereignty is astronomical. They'll do just about anything, and they'll frame it as they did a great thing, but ultimately what they're doing is literally oppression. It's no different than plantation owners strengthening chains, and thickening them. So and then finally, it's to deal with that, you have to be able to create international relationships. So what kind of trade with who? Can you close the circuit? Can you are there potentials for trading with other communist parties, maybe anti-imperialist economies, things of that nature? And then of course all of the legal things that go along with that, because the best part is you're not doing this from a point of nowhere where there's not where you have to be honest and you're playing on an uneven field, because they're being and they get the benefit of being dishonest. The fact is, a lot of these legal structures that they use to exploit us, right? Like the ways that they get out of taxation, the ways that they, obfuscate their corporate structures, all of that stuff. Guess what? We can use it too. So if the idea is to stay out of and stay off of their radar for as long as possible, right? Until you have a large enough material base to be able to defend it. All right, so let's get into the first topic, because I've already gone along. I've already explained bullet points way too long. Believe me, guys, I know. I will steal the oxygen from the room if you let me.
He ain't lying.
No, we've had 5-hour conversations where I was just a monologue, and this guy can talk. So yeah, the business selection. So let's talk about imperialism, right? So imperialism is important for the Marxist-Leninist approach to selecting a business. First off, what are the number one threats to anything that we do? It's going to be monopoly, and that's a key foundational leg or piece of imperialism. It's what makes the entire thing run. And monopoly is, well, how do you compete with monopoly? Well, you can't. They can do all sorts of things to sort of destroy whatever product that you build. That you're so everybody looks at that and they go, oh, it's pointless. Give up, move on. Or accept that you'll only ever be able to grow these small things. And that's truly not the case. What's interesting about imperialism is it has predatory profit motives. So one of the predatory profit motives, specifically because imperialism is the ownership, and it's usually the finance, right? Finance subordination of the industrial sector or, industries. And so what happened in our country, or what's happened pretty much in, every imperialist country, is the banks own things like, I don't know, say soap, right? Every soap that's on the shelf, is, produced by, 4 or 5 monopolies. Those 4 or 5 monopolies, are actually owned, or at least have a plurality ownership from all of the major, private equity firms and the hedge funds and, the major banks and the ones that we're talking the international ones, right? So the massive ones. The ones owned by all of the names that we all know, like, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Vanderbilt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the thing is, that soap company, it has the majority, or at least the plurality stock, holding in that is from these imperialists. Well, they also own the plurality of every other industry, really, because they have their ownership, through, stocks and finance in every single company there is. So they also and how these industries interact is important, right? So if, for example, they want to make a lot of money in the healthcare industry, which they own the hospitals, they own the insurance companies, the pharmaceuticals, all that stuff. They make way the heck more money off of our diseases than they do off of selling soap. So if they're not making a lot of profit, or at least not enough, in comparison, and they own both businesses, what they'll do, and what they have done, for example, is there are a lot of they've corrupted things like the FDA, right? So the FDA is corrupt, and they have lobby groups to get the FDA to regulate things in that are absolutely horrible. For example, most most of the soaps, certainly if not all of them, and certainly a large percentage of your cosmetic products are required to have things like carcinogens and PFAS and all of these toxic, health deteriorating chemicals that will get you sick and are designed to actually get you sick. Not sick enough that you can't be treated forever by the time that you do get sick, which means that they get the most amount of money out of you from the medical industry. So here is an issue where you can identify, say, something in the cosmetics lines, right, that you can produce that doesn't require these particular carcinogens or PFAS or anything else. And then you can figure out how to produce that thing, and then in a way that will literally be better for everybody, and therefore marketable to everybody, and therefore something that you can get out and sell. But what about the regulation stuff? Well, there's a lot of loopholes. For example, in soap, there is something called a true soap. True soaps are unregulatable because they've had thousands of years of existing and proof that they're not toxic, they're not bad for you, and they do exactly what they say they do. So in this particular case, one of the things that I did was I produced I patented, I came up with a new chemical process to, make this particular type of soap, happen. And I made it a luxury soap, so it will get, a significant amount of, revenue return. And this particular soap is a true soap. So I can put it on the shelves if I can get it on the shelves. That's the next, issue. Marketing and getting to market is definitely serious business. You can't just make something and pretend like it's going to be sold. You have to go out and get it on the shelves. But anyway, a true soap is healthy. It is actually better for your skin than practically anything out there anyway. It's more effective. This is the crazy part. Oftentimes they'll sell us these inferior things, but they'll make them sound like they're so much better because, like, they'll do antimicrobial. Antimicrobial just means you got something in there that's going to cause you cancer. Okay, but like, are there true soaps that are antimicrobial? The answer is yes. You can have antimicrobial. Now, the problem is you can't call it that, but that's a marketing thing. That's not an actual obstruction to being able to get it out on the market. So you just use the legal terminology that's available to you to communicate that it is, in fact, antimicrobial, and without saying it, and then you market it. Right now, this type of thing, they're not going to be able to put true soaps on the market themselves. I mean, maybe smaller businesses will once they see that it's working, and that's fine because you can compete with regular competitors, and that's just how markets are supposed to work. But when you're going up against monopoly, this is where everything is set against you, and they'll steal everything. They'll whatever the case may be. So this is a way that you can get in that vat. So the predatory model means that they can't sell a soap that's not going to give people cancer because that would cut way too much out of their profits. They can't make something that's been basically proven to be healthy for thousands of years. They can't. So all they can do is market over your stuff and either launch negative ad campaigns against it, which that definitely is a problem. It causes a vulnerability, but it's not insurmountable. It's not like putting your thing on the shelf and they can put 500 things on the shelves and they can market out everything and then your product disappears because no one's going to buy something that can be had in better packaging with better marketing that they're not even aware of, right? So these are the things that you have to consider when looking at the imperialist vacuums that are created. Another thing they do is planned obsolescence. If you're familiar with John Deere, those of you who are, this is crazy, right? So they build these tractors to be basically trash. They'll do the job, but they'll also break down a lot. And then they made it so that you can't even, it'll void the warranty. And they made it, I think it's even illegal.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's illegal to fix your own tractor. Right?
Insane.
Yeah,
Absolutely insane.
Now, there's a workaround to this too, right? Now, this is one of those midterm projects, something that you do later when you actually have the capital. But, we can create, there's an open source project that has blueprints for a modular tractor that is, you can fix any single part or replace any single part within 2 hours. You can mix and match different tool attachments and everything. And it costs $15,000 to make, right? And that's it. Now, you combine this with, say, a materials superiority, model where there's advancements in tech like superwood, where it compresses wood to 1/8 what it usually, is, and it still preserves the fiber strength simply by just breaking down the cellulose. Anyway, let's not get into the science of it. The point is, this stuff, even though 1/8 the width of a normal board, is as strong as 10 times stronger than steel, right? Now imagine a tractor that's made from something that can't break. Certainly it can hold loads that are stronger, that and do actual work that regular John Deere tractors can't do. And not only is it easily fixable, but it's open source, so nobody can tell you that you can't fix it. And on top of that, it's cheap and it's not going to break down. Now, is it a business model to continue to sell tractors? Maybe not, but that's not what our concern is. Our concern is to make the current model, the current monopolies and the current predatory models obsolete. So this is another way of thinking about like how you get a vacuum. If the competitors can't actually address the problems that you're fixing, and they can't compete with those problems, then you have your opportunity, and that's how you select for. All right. Second point, and we'll have a breakout discussion on this because we do have to talk about what productive labor actually is, and this is that old barista conversation that everybody hates, but we'll break it down for you, make it real easy to understand. So, and it's, by the way, it's not a value judgment on the people who are baristas. It's just what it is. You can't change the structure of something. It is the structure whether you like it or not. So the type of business that we select, whether it's productive or not, is extraordinarily important, right? Because if, for example, parties that rely on things like real estate and rent, well, the rentier economy is quite literally a capitalist economy. And when a party gets used to getting the material, things that it needs to build out a party, but it comes from a place where the material conditions or the material incentives to abolish the things that they originally set out to abolish are actually keeping them afloat, then the party sort of stagnates, right? Now, we've seen this in a number of parties. I'm not going to mention names because obviously it would be politically, but look, there's parties all around the world that have, hung their hat on the rentier model. They rent out businesses. I think even the CPU. There was the CPUSA has.
The CPUSA has like something like.
I know. I said I wasn't going to name names, but this isn't. But this isn't international. This is a beef we have. We split from them specifically because they continuously violate communist, principles and practices.
Yeah, but it's like millions of dollars basically worth of real estate, and they just sit on it.
So why
they don't utilize it at all?
So why would you as a party abolish the thing that is keeping you afloat? In fact, this creates a bureaucracy that continuously sits on its hands, collects the money, and promises that revolution will come, right? This is a second international type situation where, the incentives are bad, so everybody just rah-rahs imperialism until they cease to be communist at all. Anyway, so how we select? Well, we select for productive economy. Now, there's another type of labor. It's I want to call it. I call it metastatic labor. It's a term that I came up with because labor aristocracy isn't really the term for it. So what it is, it's basically kind of like cancerous, right? So this is where I was going to discuss the barista thing. the baristas themselves are not bad. What it is the occupation is. The occupation, let's look at the coffee bean, for example. The coffee bean is overproduced. The amount of profit that you can make off of selling coffee from the agriculture, from the going from growing in the fields to distributing to selling, it's actually a falling rate. The falling rate of profit is so bad that they're practically, it's probably more expensive to grow it than it is because there's just not enough demand, right? Then you can sell it for. So what you have here is a problem of how do they make profit off of something that they, can't even get good margins on? Well, add labor. So now you invent this, because I'm going to tell you, in the 1980s, there was no baristas, or if there was, it was these ultra rich areas, all the way in, in like Beverly Hills or Malibu and stuff, right? In the Hamptons. So this was not like a universal or well-tread profession of any kind. But what they realized is you can charge a lot more for that coffee if you add a person in there, and then you basically create a marketing plan that justifies the excess pricing because this person handcrafted it with art. Well, a coffee machine can do the same thing. And now that AI and all the other automated capabilities are in existence, literally even the artistry that they do on the freaking, foam is something that a machine can do, right? I mean, hell, I think with the current state of things, you could probably even upload the image that you want and it'll just do it, right? So this is how advanced the technology is. So there is no actual need. The only thing that does is the labor that's involved then increases or price gouges, right? The actual price of coffee. So the coffee itself has not gained any value. It's still being overproduced, but you're buying something at a way higher price because there's labor involved. They justify that labor by telling you that, oh, this kind of craftsmanship and experience could not be had if you just, left it to automation, but it can. You don't get the human interaction or contact, but who cares? I mean, and then lastly, what do you do when you're a capitalist and you've got way too many people who are unemployed? Well, you create bullshit jobs, right? Because a revolutionary is someone who is jobless and, several, only a couple of days away from missing 3 meals, right? So to alleviate the pressure of having too many people who are unemployed, you create a bullshit job that requires service to the capitalist that literally benefits the capitalist by helping him price gouge the product which is overproduced and therefore worth nothing in the margins. Now they get their margins back. They get a guy who's doing a service job who now can't exist and can't, because he couldn't exist before. Being unemployed is not sustainable. It's something that eventually leads to homelessness, and of course what the Chinese call is the kill line, or
I believe, the kill line,
something like that. Yeah. So they take away the amount of people who are on the kill line. So now they're in a job that reinforces price gouging, and they literally depend on that job. So therefore, they'll defend the capitalist system to keep that job, even if they organize, because it doesn't matter if you organize. You organized what? You organized entrenching the capitalist system and entrenching price gouging practices. That's all it is.
Even with the price gouging that goes on, it's not even enough profit that's produced from the price gouging to even be able to pay these workers a decent wage. They rely off of tips. So, I mean, just think about that. Like, you're not even producing any kind of freaking value enough to pay the workers, even with the price gouging. So you now have to force the customers to feel this awkward situation. Do I tip my barista? And that goes right down the line of almost every other service job as well.
Yeah, and there's other unproductive jobs too. I mean, this is going to hurt, because this is one of those PMC middle class jobs that nobody likes to talk about. those guys that are the medical files processors, whatever, the ones that sit up in front of the doctor's office and they process all the insurance. Well, listen, insurance is a vampiric capitalist structure. There's no need for it. You could literally have a much better system with a Medicare for all, whether it be single payer or whether it actually be communist in nature and literally just something that the government provides. The government provides the funding for it. It reduces the cost of actual medical care and produces better freaking outcomes. So the fact that these jobs exist at all and that these people need those jobs, and they wouldn't be PMC without them. They literally could not get the kind of the material gain from them. That is another one of those metastatic labor jobs, which again, when I say metastatic, that means cancerous. And of course it's cancerous because these are jobs or positions that put people in a position to defend the capitalist structure because their material needs and necessities are tied up with them. And that actually creates a problem because labor is split indefinitely unless you create something as an alternative for them. And this is, of course, the reason why, as communists, it's not just for our own sake that we create productive industries, but it's for the sake of providing an out for the people who aren't capable of exiting from these metastatic labor positions. Anyway, wanted to open the thing for discussion on the barista thing, but not sure how to go about that.
Well, I mean, I'll just say that, this is not the kind of business, for the reasons that we explain, that we want to have as these cooperative, party-aligned businesses, because you're not going to get enough profit, and it literally sits on the bottom of the economic chain of command, basically. The kind of economy that we need to rebuild in this country is industrial, and that just happens to complement our party model, our plans to actually reindustrialize the country.
Right. And there's the other part. There's another vacuum. They deindustrialize because finance is how they make the most profit, and so finance is this creation of fictitious capital. They've pretty much hollowed out the entire real economy. So the only way to get a real economy in this country is to create productive jobs. And if we're not in the business of creating productive jobs, then we're stalling out the process of getting back to a genuinely beneficial dual power economy that will literally drive progress instead of decay and degenerate backwards into, well, honestly, I mean, what is it? What is metastatic labor? Metastatic labor is whether you're getting paid a lot to do it or getting paid very little. It's no difference than being, a house slave on a plantation. It's what it is.
And the co-op model wouldn't resolve the contradictions here at all either. It would basically just mean that the worker owners of that co-op would now have to pay themselves less just to keep their business afloat. We need to be able to produce enough capital that we can create our own independent economy separate from the established economy. You'll never be able to achieve that through a service-based model.
You just can't. So, all right. So let's move on to the third topic. I'm sorry. So bootstrapping, and this is one of the ones everybody came up with some of the businesses and that they can do. Now, I understand it's difficult to start a business if you're broke, and a lot of us are. How do you start something that requires a ton of capital? Well, one of the first things that we're told, and this is by design, is that we have to start a business already ahead of the curve, right? Start a business not at the start, but like a little bit further along, right? So this idea of, well, I want to start a shipping company. Oh, well, then you have to own all of this stuff. Well, I want to start a lumber mill. Well, if you're starting with the concept of I want to start a lumber mill, and you try to get the capital to build that, that's a lot of freaking money. And by the way, that's a few steps ahead of where you could actually start. So the idea is realistic expectations and knowing how much money you have, what you can actually start with, and then where the labor comes in to reduce the amount of capital or seed capital that you need to start these businesses. A good example is the lumber mill, right? So you want to start a lumber mill, fantastic, but that's like a few steps ahead. How can you start from scratch, bootstrapping? Well, first off, okay, you have to find out what is required to create lumber. And I took a look into this. I created an entire business plan for this particular one. So check it out. There's these $1,500 to $2,000 mobile lumber mills, right? You can you put them onto the back of your hitch on your truck if you got one. And this is obviously something for people who have trucks. So if you do, fantastic. If you don't, I understand this is not your solution. But if you already have a truck, then the $2,000, I understand. You don't. Where did the $2,000 come from? $2,000 comes from your chapter, right? So you're in a collective now. If you identify one of these opportunities, if you identify one of these opportunities, then what you do is you present it to your chapter and you say, listen, can we save up the seed capital for this? Now, if it takes you a couple months, takes you a few months, that's fine. I mean, not everything can be done immediately, but you do have a collective network of people who can actually pitch in. Some of them have more than some, and some of them have less. But eventually, you will be able to save up through collecting that money and planning for it, that $2,000. Okay, you now have the $2,000. You buy your thing. But where do you get this? Where do you source the lumber from, right? Now, this would be a problem because, you can't go up to the lumber companies and say, well, can I, some of those trees that you're felling, can I buy some of them? No, because they're going into their own production. They're not going to sell you their own trees. So what are you going to do? Well, interesting. There are tree services out there, and the tree services, everything that they have to take off that property is costing them money and time and labor. So if you call up these tree services and you go, hey, listen, I got a mobile lumber mill. If you have any, like 8 to 12 foot, tree trunks at a particular, and you identify the particular types of trees that will give you an actual profit, then you tell them what trees those are. You tell them and you say, listen, you can call me up anytime. I'm rolling out there and I'll go ahead and take that from you. Now, the best part is if they got white or red oak, well, the green wood that you get out of that is, somewhere around $400. It gets $400 for, less than a day's work on, you got to be on call and that's the only thing. Now, that's what gets you the initial money, right? But then you start looking at it, and this is where the scalability comes in, right? So how do you get to the lumber mill? Very simple. First, you're going to start selling the greenwood. You don't have the land or the property or the space or the tool shed, whatever the heck you need to go ahead and cure the wood. And of course, that takes time too, and you have to be able to invest in that. But right now, you're just trying to eat, right? So you do as many of these jobs. You collect whatever capital, like you take a piece of the labor for yourself. Obviously, you pay yourself. You don't, forego that. But you let that capital accumulate over time, and as it does, you go out, you do the research, you figure out what exactly you need to do to get the lumber to the next stage, which is the cured lumber, because the cured lumber will sell for like $800 right? All right, so once you have that in place and you've built up from the capital, now you've got a small operation where you can sell lumber that's cured. But then, well, how do you improve that? Well, kiln fired wood, for example, is even more. And now you do a kiln fired white oak, that's like somewhere around $1,600 to $1,800. So once you build up the capital, you scale to that. And now when you're selling that kind of wood, and because every time you make these steps, then these incremental steps, and it grows and it grows and it grows, you are increasing the rate in which you're getting profit. And when you increase the rate of when you're getting profit, the faster you can build. So yeah, bootstrapping starts out slow and it sucks, but you don't start with the lumber mill. You start with the mobile lumber mill, and you sell greenwood, then you sell cured wood, then you sell kilned wood, and then you buy your lumber mill. Now you're open for business to do even more. So that's where bootstrapping comes along. Now, that was my example. Some of these guys, they also have some other examples, and I want we should explore them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start and say, I'm more in the agricultural section of my thought processes. I grew up around cornfields. So when I think, how am I going to set up a chapter enterprise from the ground up, this is the framework I start with. Gardening would be the first step before you get to the point where you're actually having fields of corn or soybeans or whatever that you might be growing, right? So grow some tomato plants, grow some pepper plants, some cucumber plants, have a small garden. Obviously, you have to have access to land. That's obviously something that not everyone has access to. So, it depends on what your material conditions and where you start. But after you are able to go through a whole season of growing all these produce, after you take out whatever you're cut, whether it's literally eating the food that you grow or it's taking a cut of the profit of the vegetables that you grow on a fruit or vegetable stand on the side of the road in front of the property that you're growing the food on, then you take that and then you move that towards the next stage, which is, okay, well, I need to be able to grow better vegetables, things that are more profitable. And you do that for a few seasons. Now, no, that's a few years most likely. But if you do that for a few seasons, eventually you'll be able to afford the small plot of land that allows you to grow even more and keep producing more and more. It's about basically staging your economic development first from the material conditions that you sit on, and then expanding outwards, seizing whatever economic opportunity you can to get more seed capital to produce more.
And I would add to that. So the other part that you can do is a little bit of research, right? And you may have to start with, the seeds that you got, right?
Yeah.
But once you get a little bit of money out of that, you look at the stuff that, gets you way the heck more money. If you can set up a shed, I don't want to say a shed, but like say, a couple thousand square feet, which I know is a lot, but if you have it on your property, you can set up. I found this, and it's not gross, but it's actually real. One of the most profitable things that you can produce per square foot on any kind of agricultural land is snails.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm not a fan of it personally. You told me about this.
It's so weird. It's so weird. But especially if you're in an area where there are city centers around, and especially if those city centers are known for like any kind of resort or culinary, snails, believe it or not, it's a very rapidly reproducing protein source. And get this, and this is the weird part, but it's also cool. So, it'll work. They produce mucin, and mucin, when powdered, or what it turned into a powder, is in every one of the most expensive cosmetics in existence. So if you eventually get everything set up so you can actually go to a industrial kitchen, you get yourself an industrial kitchen, and then you start producing mucin stuff. This stuff sells for I don't know, I think it's like $80 a liter. And a snail colony, or in just a couple thousand square feet, you can start with like 3,000 snails, and in like 6 to 8 months have 80,000, because they reproduce that freaking phenomenal. And this is another. Personally, I'm grossed out by this. I'm also not really a farmer, so I mean, whatever. But the snail caviar is apparently extraordinarily expensive too. So there's 3 revenue streams that you can get from that. And if you're thinking about scalability, sure, maybe start with tomatoes, but build into something that gets,
tobacco would be another great example. Now, yes,
all right.
You know where I'm going with this. Obviously, you can make sales from being able to produce tobacco products, but you can derive nicotine, which is a natural pesticide, from the tobacco plant, and then you can create a pesticide that is actually good for the environment. And there's multiple ways of sales, whether it be selling the tobacco, selling as a pesticide for plant, preventing pests from eating your crops, and then plus you could use it yourself for your own crops, for all your other crops as well. So, you're just building up different things that you can basically build your own circular system. Insular circular system of agriculture where, okay, I'm going to grow this stuff that acts as a natural pesticide. You can also get a goat or get a few other kind of farm animals, right? Those animals, I'm sure a lot of farmers right now are worried about the cost of fertilizer. You can make your own.
Right. Yeah.
So, multiple different
The
avenues.
Yankee Tanky Tobacco Lobby has spoken. And Grant, you say you were thinking about one of these things. Let's hear some. Let's get the brainstorming going.
Yes, a concept that I came up with that, in the most direct way possible, could also be used to combine with a dual power strategy of sorts, would be to get into the market of arms manufacturing. Now, to some, that might sound wild
What?
No,
like
there is a logical reasoning. No, like gunsmithing.
Okay. Which is our constitutional
Here's
right.
my reason. Yes.
With permits and all sorts of other things. The legality here is what I'm worried about. But I get, like, look, yes, you can do that. But I was not anticipating that. Listen, I'm all for it. But yeah, that's one of those ones. It's difficult because the legal structures that are involved. Now, I'm not trying to poo-poo your thing. Yeah, we'll let hear you out, but I'm just worried that everybody's gonna think ACP's going into gun manufacturing. We already had that crazy asshole talking about how we were running. We don't want that smoke. But we're trying to provide dual power solutions, things that are going to benefit. Yes, let's do.
Being as doing it as legally as basically doing it legally and in keeping with our Second Amendment rights, procedural process, and also in keeping with our own ideology. Marx himself wrote that the proletariat should not be disarmed. Going through with all that, and here's the thing too, the ruling class, especially in American history, has already demonstrated that as we near times of great uncertainty, they are not above curtailing our Second Amendment rights. They will fight, even if it's
they were doing that over in Virginia, right?
Yes, and even if it's detrimental to, because we know how much we could go into it with the military-industrial complex and whatnot. Not that gun bans will necessarily affect that necessarily, but even if it is harmful to the profit margins of arms manufacturers, the federal government has already demonstrated that they are not above taking actions that may harm the industry that they collude with so much, which is why it needs to be on us and our movement when it comes to dual power to create our own
sure.
our own,
no, I mean, like, I'm not saying that's not true.
Manufacturing.
At the very least, it should be done by the civilians who are in the economies or the closed circuit economies that we're building. I definitely wouldn't put it on us per se specifically, because the other part of this is the whole freaking country doesn't have to become our party. We just have to create an economy that works for all of them, that they trust in. Right? That's really what the whole point of this entire business three-parter is about. So, I mean, I would say I agree, and just to create party distance from specifically that kind of industry, it would be something that we would encourage amongst regular civilians who are starting out their own business that were within our economies, that would benefit everybody. Because listen, there is a real Second Amendment. That Second Amendment is 100% valid. And that Second Amendment allows you to protect yourself from, harm, right? So if somebody comes after you with illegal force, you have the right to protect yourself. And this is So, look, even Stalin was like, do you think, communists are enamored with violence? We are not. We would not take violent means if it were not forced upon us by the attack of capital itself. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. So please, nobody take this as, we're going to start building an arms industry. And so much as we are actually invested in the people able to defend themselves. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I had
when I'm talking about the federal. Yeah, and when I'm talking about the federal government taking steps that might, even if it's detrimental to the armaments industry itself, that would what I mean is they're not above taking steps that do inherently violate American Second Amendment rights without going through the legal process itself. What I mean is they're not above using the curtailing the actual legal sale of firearms themselves, or taking steps to limit the amount of arms manufacturing that can happen among the civilian economy. They're perfectly willing to basically take these steps that de facto neutralize the Second Amendment without them ever having to put a bill in the works, or to basically just make it harder to act.
Yeah, actually, there was no, and by the way, I know this doesn't have anything specifically to do with the topic that we're discussing, but I just read an article where this data center was being built, and they said, oh, the data center will provide its own energy, so it'll be okay, so that's and so everybody went with it. They're like, yeah, that's great. And then they then there was another project where they're like, and we're going to put this battery storage thing in here for all the green energy that we're going to be bringing in. But this was actually a way for them to smuggle in the fact that they had the green energy projects themselves were non-existent. Just this battery bank thing that they were putting out. And the battery bank, lo and behold, is directly adjacent to the data center that they were going to build, and the people are going to have to pay for the battery bank because ecological concerns. But in reality, they're paying for the data center's energy bill, basically, and it's being offloaded to them. And so that was what they were really against. They were like, if they're going to do this, don't offload the costs onto us. And so they said, oh, we promise legally we won't. This is going to be for the green energy stuff. And this is, and they released it separate, so it's separate dates, so nobody could make the connection. And there you go. That's how they circumvent, legally getting around a political issue that they know that they're violating, So we understand that, yeah, the Second Amendment, there's a million and one ways for them to get around the Second Amendment. And yeah, eventually, one of the things that's going to happen is, that capitalists will do anything that they can, whether by legal or illegal means, and they'll use illegal means to come after the kind of things that we built to try and steal them. Right. This is in American history all the time. The aristocrats, when the settlers, were exiled from, taken from the streets and, put out into the middle of Virginia territories. These guys developed the land, with their hands. No freaking domesticated animals, no draft animals, anything. They worked their asses off. They killed themselves to do it, and then the aristocrats would come and take their stuff. And this is just what happens. It's been a part of our history since forever. It's the reason why we as a civilization, we do not trust the government, because the government has always been the thing that takes from us, right? So always been the thing that gives us the shaft and finagles us out of whatever we built. And obviously these are the things that we're trying to prevent, because we're gonna have to build something and keep it, right? So the idea that they would do things to try and limit our ability to defend ourselves, or legally defend ourselves and the property that we've created through their own laws and their own freaking systems, this is something that we have to factor in. So yeah, I mean, if the civilian base that exists within these economic zones that we create, decide that they want to manufacture those things, I'm 100% behind it, because eventually it's a supply chain that we're going to lose access to. So yeah.
I mean, another example of just how the U.S. government likes to work around their own laws and their own system to achieve what they wanted. The U.S. government back in 2019 ended up acquiring Citgo, which is Venezuela's oil company. That was here in the United States, basically, where you would go and get your gas pumped. It was kind of like their token, international company that Venezuela had that allowed them to accumulate capital, right? Well, that's what they ended up doing was they found legal loopholes to be able to acquire Citgo by not recognizing Maduro, the then, and as far as I'm concerned, still should be the sitting president of Venezuela. And by doing that, they were able to seize the company. So, this is something that very common that the U.S. government likes to do. Just work around any way possible their own laws, their own legal system. So in the same way that the U.S. government and multinational corporations like to do that to our law, that's what our party should also do.
Right. So use the look. Our capitalists have created systems of corruption to obfuscate, their corporate structures, to obfuscate where their money goes. The Panama Papers, exposed a ridiculous amount of corruption and wealth that had been extracted from not just the American people, but from all the colonies under, the unipolar world, and it's in the trillions of dollars. And this is what they do legally, right? Well, these legal structures that allow them to accomplish these things are also the legal structures that we can couch our actual productivity in, so that it's the same kind. That we have the same benefit of opacity and the same ability to obscure. You don't reveal your hand. You keep your hand, with the back facing. So this is what we have to do. And this is why it's possible, by the way. The funny thing is, it's the very corruption that they created, which creates the very conditions for which we can actually move forward. So, and we're not talking about engaging in corruption. We're talking about subverting those structures so that they will serve people. They will serve our actual people. We can create ownership among our people, and that ownership can be protected at least for as long as possible before the capitalists force an actual conflict. And obviously, we would be defending ourselves and within our legal rights to defend ourselves should they do that, because everything that we do is going to be legal. All right. Yep. Now, we talked about scalability. And the last one is, okay, so now you've got a business and this business has grown and it's scalable, and now you can invest in other businesses. The first thing that you got to do is you have to take stock of whatever the township that you're in, right? Like, what's the productivity? What are the essential needs? Now, and what are the vulnerabilities? So a lot of the vulnerabilities have everything to do with the resources, right? So if you're dependent on capitalists for all the resources that you get to, to conduct your business, then they have every means of coercion to come in and destroy whatever you're doing or limit whatever you're doing so that they turn you into a glorified commune. Now, this is not what we want. We want to be able to produce something that's replicable and that can expand into other townships and other townships and other townships. So the first thing you have to do is figure out a way to create businesses that give you grid independence. One of the cool things that I found is there's something called the Great Reed. Now, it grows about 8 inches a day, right? It sequesters more carbon into the ground than it does if you burn it, right? And you can pelletize this stuff, and it actually has the same, or at least very close to the same energy output when it burns as coal. Now, sure, bad environment thing, right? You're burning coal. But the thing is, when it grows to that height, more carbon gets put into the ground than gets released into the air. So you're literally at a carbon negative energy production here. And this is some low tech stuff, the kind of stuff that the energy, right, that or the coal burners or coal generators that they have that you can get off Alibaba they're inexpensive. Now imagine if all it takes is 10 acres to run 500 acres worth of farm, because that 10 acres of Great Reed is producing enough electricity to run the whole thing. What could you do with 100 acres? What could you do with 200 acres? This is the kind of stuff that we need to be thinking about, because this is the kind of stuff that you can actually do. Right now, there's some states that this thing is illegal. They obviously know how beneficial it is, so they restrict its ability to catch on because they don't want energy independence. They are trying to prevent grid independence, right? But and this doesn't even require the high tech of solar. This is quite literally just agriculture, right? And this is a way to get rid or to get yourself off of that grid dependence, right? So the other parts are, the water, all of these systems. You identify the businesses that you can create. Some of these businesses are not going to have the highest margins, but that's why you first build out your high margin industries, and then you go after the industries that aren't going to make a massive amount of profit, but serve the people and actually serve your security interests. So you want to create this economy that's cut off from, being influenced or coerced by the outside, grid, which creates dependencies. You have to think about the kind of businesses that you can do. You have to think about the resources. You have to start thinking like a prepper. It's a weird thing to say, but those preppers and those homesteaders, they have some of the best ideas, and they have some of the best ways to get around being on the grid. Why do they want to get off the grid? The grid is literally the thing that's siphoning all of their fucking opportunity and all of their wealth away from them, and creating dependencies that prevent them from succeeding or prospering. So this is that reason. And
I was just going to say, unlike the preppers, we actually have an advantage that they don't, which is cooperation with our party and all of us collectively. These preppers, they're just going out this on their own. They have some great ideas, but they're still thinking too individualistically. We don't think individualistically, but we need to start tapping into the resources and knowledge that these prepper communities actually have.
Exactly, because and by the way, I it's one of the things that I've been doing. I've actually been building out in my spare time, which I have almost none of. But anyway, in my spare time, I've been building out a dual power encyclopedia and database, and this collects all of these resources, all of these business opportunities, the skills that you need to operate them, the resources that you need, the workflows, everything. So eventually, I have a program or an analytical program that can break down by a township's available resources and what you can do there. It can actually build out like a 5-year plan type of thing, right? So we can automate this and use the database as the means to address all of the material specifics of whatever township in America that there is. And then from that database, create that method of creating these little, closed grid, closed circuit economies. Now, the next part is, we'll discuss this because it's going to be in the next episode, because I call it co-op vanguardism or conglomerate vanguardism, which is like, how do you tie all these things together and keep them from running away from you? Because, there are going to be people who will be like, yeah, I have the opportunity. Now I'm going to steal it and walk away. These are the kind of things you got to prevent. And also there's an accountability element. You don't want any corruption in your system as you're building it. So these are the things we'll discuss on the next episode. But the last thing, and this is the thing that I think is very important, eventually you're going to grow to a point where you're going to need resources that the country itself can't provide. And that's just a natural law. That's the reason why international trade exists. It's because there are resources some people have in abundance, and there are resources other people don't, and vice versa. So these trade networks exist because there is a need, because you can't develop the kind of sophisticated technology and industry and infrastructure that creates the current technological age. So we're not trying to go back to ye old ways. We're not trying to create some kind of archaic communism where we've regressed. Communism is the thing that actually progresses the forces of productivity and forces of civilization. So the idea is, how do you do international trade when you're considering these things? And one of the things that we believe strongly in is creating strong trade partnerships between the communist parties of other countries as well as the anti-imperialist blocs of other countries. Now, there's obviously a significant amount of legal, style considerations to go along with it. And so obviously we're not going to be discussing those, because if we did, well, then we'd be tipping our hand. But the idea is, if you want a closed system and you don't want the capitalists to benefit, eventually you're going to run up against this particular roadblock. And this weakness is actually a strength, because once you start these trade partnerships and you're able to get the capital circulating around people who are actually advancing human progress instead of creating more wars, then you've closed the circuit. You've created a circuit of productivity that keeps everyone growing, to include your trade partners, and your trade partners are able to build out the kind of society that they need to build out. It strengthens diplomatic ties. It strengthens supply chains, and it gives everybody a unified purpose, which is to get out of this endless corruption. I know at the end of the day, we discussed a lot of, interesting topics for people who are into business and very boring, dry topics for people who are not. But this is actually the bread and butter. This is the engine that drives everything else. You can't do communism without the productive forces. And so the people were like, oh, this is so boring. Guess what? Remember what the very beginning of the episode where I said, everybody wants to look like Stalin, but nobody wants to be Stalin. Well, this is that part of being Stalin, because one of the things that Stalin was the absolute best at was organizing this shit right here. The 5-year plan was the spine. It was the backbone of the entire Soviet expansion, and their entire freaking success was predicated on that 5-year plan. And this is the dual power methodology for addressing how to start. You got to start from somewhere. It starts as a business. How do you get to the 5-year plan? This is how. So stay tuned for the next episode, where we're going to be discussing the vanguard part of the situation, where there's the way to do accountability and the way to make sure that it grows in a way that doesn't escape you, right? In a way that benefits society and creates the kind of accountability that allows for full whole process democracy, the ability for every person to be an owner, everybody to be have a say in anti-corruption, from both the political angle and the economic angle. The idea that everybody has both political and economic democracy and agency. So with that, it's been a wonderful freaking stream. I'm glad you stuck with us. And hey, the boring stuff is the stuff that actually makes things go.
We're spending billions every year for guns and ammunition. Our army and our navy dear to keep in good condition, while millions live in misery and millions died before us. Don't sing my country, 'tis of thee, but sing this little chorus. Should I ever be a soldier, beneath the red flag I would fight. Should the gun I ever shoulder, it's to crush the tyrant's might. Join the army of the toilers, men and women fall in line. Wake slaves of the world, arouse, do your duty for the cause, for land and liberty. And many are made and pure and fair. Her love and pride must offer on Mammon's altar in despair to fill the master's coffer. The gold that pays the mighty fleet, from tender youth he squeezes, while brawny men must walk the street and face the wintry breezes. Should I ever be a soldier, beneath the red flag I would fight. Should the gun I ever shoulder, it's to crush the tyrant's might. Join the army of the toilers, men and women fall in line. Wake slaves of the world, arouse, do your duty for the cause, for land and liberty. Why do they mount their Gatling gun 1,000 miles from ocean, where hostile fleet could never run? Ain't that a funny notion? If you don't know the reason why, just strike for better wages. And then, my friends, if you don't die, you'll sing this song for ages. Should I ever be a soldier, beneath the red flag I would fight. Should the gun I ever shoulder, it's to crush the tyrant's might. Join the army of the toilers, men and women fall in line. Wake slaves of the world, arouse, do your duty for the cause, for land and liberty.